When Joseph got off the bus, silence literally rang in his ears. This wasn't normal silence. It was a deep emptiness where even the street animals seemed to have forgotten to make a sound. Joseph straightened the uniform on his body, still smelling of gunpowder and barracks, and pressed a crumpled photograph against his chest. His daughter, still a little girl, was smiling in a pink dress. He had guarded that photo as if his life depended on it. Thanks to it, he had emerged with little damage from the sound of gunfire and harsh orders from superiors. He owed every line of his life to that smile. The house door appeared just ahead. Joseph expected to hear a faint sound from the yard, the sound of sandals hitting the ground quickly, but he heard nothing, saw nothing. Wild weeds had covered the entrance to the house, and a small bicycle lay on its side, rusted, unused. His heart tightened, but he kept walking because soldiers don't show weakness. At least that's what he had learned throughout his life. But with each meter he felt his breath less, as if he were carrying all the weight of the front lines on his shoulders again. He pushed the door. The iron opened with a high-pitched, sharp noise that scratched the ears. Joseph savored the moment. This sound, years ago, was what prompted his daughter to run and hug him, shouting, "My daddy's back!" Now there was only sound, making everything feel empty. The walls of the house, once painted white, had become dirty over time. The curtain in his daughter's room was torn, hanging like a forgotten surrender flag. His breath was shortening. He had become afraid to take deep breaths. He climbed the stairs, unable to dare take a deep breath. He knocked on the door. Once, twice, nothing. "Scarlett," he called out, his voice almost choked with emotion. This time it wasn't a war cry, but a plea. And silence. His hand trembled, his heartbeat gradually accelerating. Joseph lowered the doorknob and went inside. It smelled of dust, and there were marks of dragged furniture on the floor, as if hastily moved. A small bed had been made in the corner, but there was a crease in the sheets. Joseph sensed the suspicious situation as if it had only been arranged to show it was unused. On the table inside, a doll with one eye missing still stood. It belonged to his daughter. He touched the toy and felt the rough fabric of old stitching. He felt a lump in his throat, crushing all his discipline. "My daughter, where are you?" Every detail of the house seemed to tell of half-lived lives. The broken plate in the sink, the frame that had fallen behind the couch, the open closet with missing clothes. Someone had left, but there was no sign of farewell. No note, no message, no smell of fresh food. He only felt and knew the certainty that the house had been suddenly abandoned, leaving only ghosts behind. Joseph dropped his canvas bag to the floor with a thud. His hand instinctively reached for the gun he no longer carried. A soldier trained to face enemies of flesh and bone now trembled before the most merciless possibility. He had come face to face with his own daughter's absence. He sat on the edge of the bed, his back hunched and his head in his hands. For a moment, everything he had heard on the battlefield came back. Gunshots, screams, explosions. But now it wasn't the noise of war that was tearing him apart. It was the silence of the house. Suddenly he stood up. On the corridor wall there were still traces of Scarlett's chalk drawings. Small houses, flowers, a crooked sun. Samuel smiled bitterly, running his fingers over those nearly faded lines, remembering the afternoons when she insisted on showing him every detail she drew, needing approval. His heart burned with both tenderness and anger. Anger for not being there to stop this. Anger for obeying his country when there was a brown-eyed, scraped-knee girl who really needed him. He went out to the yard. The wind stirred the dry leaves, and for a second he heard giggles like a distant echo and flinched, his chest filled with pain. It wasn't laughter. It was the whistle of wind passing through loose tiles. On the wall there was still an old rope where the little girl's clothes had hung. A child's sneaker, soiled with mud, had been forgotten on the ground, perhaps. He caught sight of another detail on the ground and picked it up, running the broken hair clip over his hand, closing his eyes and pressing the clip to his chest with longing and care for his daughter. "I'm back, Scarlett." "Where are you, my daughter?" The sun was setting now, the sky painted deep red. This color at other times reminded him of trenches and smoke. Now it reminded him of blood and the fear of irreparable, even impossible loss. Joseph took a deep breath. There was only one certainty. No matter how far he had to go, he wouldn't rest until he found her. Because if there was a war he couldn't lose, it was his beloved daughter. He vowed to find his daughter and bring her back. And as the night hours descended on the village, Joseph walked onto the road, in one hand a crumpled photograph and in the other a sneaker and a broken clip, ready to catch every trace, every whisper, every detail to break the silence of the house and fulfill his vow. The second night. The sky had long since darkened when Joseph turned on the living room light. The key clicked and the yellow lamp flickered as if hesitating to illuminate the room. The father silently observed the displaced furniture, the half-open drawers, and felt that strange mixture of abandonment and haste painfully in his heart. Something there hadn't been lost over time. It had been suddenly torn away, and he was sure of it. All the details were screaming this to him. He put his suitcase in the corner and walked around the house with carefully trained steps, like someone searching enemy territory, but this time not as a soldier, but as a father. In his daughter's room, he opened the closet. It was very empty, with only 2 abandoned children's t-shirts and a small jacket hanging. The rest was gone. Joseph ran his hand over the cold hanger and realized this wasn't a simple routine change. Someone had taken his daughter or made her leave. That's when he noticed the table. In the middle of the dust, an open notebook, hastily turned pages. Among the colorful drawings of flowers and houses, there was a torn leaf. The tear was new. Joseph touched the irregular edge and anxiety shook him. That missing page wasn't a detail. It was a missing message. That missing message belonged to his daughter. Someone didn't want him to see it. A noise from outside made him turn quickly. He heard dry footsteps on gravel, then the click of the door carefully closing. Joseph ran to the window and saw only someone turning the corner. His heart raced. It wasn't a hallucination. He was also sure he wasn't alone in that house. Breathing heavily, he went out onto the balcony. The wind carried the smell of wet earth and the sound of an old motor moving away. He squinted to see and analyze better. He saw a motorcycle. The motorcycle's red lights were disappearing down the road. He knew how to read the signs. The army had taught him not to ignore anything, and this was no coincidence. He went back inside. In the bedroom, on the floor and under the bed, something was reflecting light. He knelt down and carefully pulled it out. He saw a crumpled, folded piece of paper. Maybe it had fallen from the notebook. He opened it. A frightened child's handwriting. "Dad, I miss you. If I'm not here, look for me at the old market. Don't forget me." Joseph literally froze. Each word pierced his chest like fire. His daughter hadn't just felt his absence. She had left a trail and clue he could follow, and "don't forget me" came like a cry for help. The soldier tried to take a deep breath, but choked. No air came. He held the note so tightly that the edges tore even more. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. 3 hard knocks. Joseph flinched. The street lamps weren't on, and it was almost 10 p.m. He slowly opened the door. An old neighbor stood there, his face lined, his gaze hesitant. "Good evening, Joseph. I heard you returned." "Have you seen my daughter?" he interrupted. The old man said, averting his eyes, "I don't know anything, but be careful. Some people here don't like being asked questions." Before Joseph could react, the man backed away, pulled his hat forward, and hurriedly walked away as if afraid of being seen. The street sank into even more silence. Joseph closed the door, but nothing inside him was silent. Storms were raging within. The uniform could no longer give him orders because his instincts were screaming. He understood that the time had come, not to wait, but to act. There was a note. There were suspicious footsteps. There were neighbors who avoided talking. His daughter was nowhere to be found. And this situation was enough reason to drag a father back into war. He folded the paper and put it in the upper left pocket of his shirt, close to his heart. He took the child's sneaker and broken clip he had found in the yard and put them in his suitcase. This wasn't a souvenir, but evidence. He looked at the house one last time. The walls that once meant shelter had now become the ruins of a destroyed life. He couldn't stay there anymore. He opened the door. The cold night wind hit his face, but he didn't hesitate. He knew the road ahead would never be easy and wouldn't be. But he knew something else too. The time had come to act. All these events were telling him he needed to move and do something. And for a father who had learned to survive despite bombs and conflicts, there was, and could be, no greater fear than the thought of never finding his daughter again. Joseph adjusted the strap of his bag on his shoulder, kept the note close to his chest, and whispered into the darkness, "Scarlet, even if I have to. Burn the world, I will follow and pursue the sign you left me." And he set out on the road, illuminated only by a crescent moon, preparing himself in his mentality to face every silence, every threat, every lie, until he found the truth. If this story has caught your attention so far, subscribe to the channel, because what comes next is even more intense. The Old Market. Joseph walked the dirt road guided by the crescent moonlight and his daughter's memory. The Old Market wasn't just a place, it was a symbol. When he was a child, that area was the village's meeting place with fruit-filled stalls, the smell of spices, and neighbors' laughter. Now everyone said the market was dead, abandoned, a place replaced only by damp walls and echoes of strange sounds. That was where Scarlett had left her trail. When he arrived there, it was past midnight. The rusty gate creaked as he pushed it, finding a deserted courtyard covered with dry leaves. The smell of mold and rusty iron hurt his nose. Joseph went inside, watching each step. His body moved as if on patrol, shoulders tight, eyes carefully examining every corner, every detail. But his heart was beating faster than ever, because the war was no longer against invisible enemies. It was against time and the fear of losing his daughter. This triggered him, but he had to move carefully. The wind hit them, making cracking sounds reminiscent of gunfire. Joseph leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. Then he saw what made him stop. He saw a blue handkerchief stuck between the boards of a broken bench. The handkerchief was very familiar. He recognized it immediately. It was the handkerchief he had given his daughter when she turned 7, embroidered with tiny flowers. The corner was torn, but it still carried a faint lavender scent. His chest tightened. Scarlett had been there, not long ago. But why would she leave behind something so precious? While thinking, he heard footsteps. Solid, heavy, approaching from the corridor. Joseph retreated, hiding behind a pile of boxes. A flashlight scanned the area, throwing beams of light onto the peeling walls. He saw the shadow of a tall man. The stranger was muttering to himself, as if talking to himself or repeating orders. Joseph held his breath. The soldier within wanted to advance, neutralize, but the father knew he needed answers. The man passed near the crates, and Joseph could see part of his face. A poorly shaved beard, a scar on his chin, weary eyes. He had a bag in his hand. He left it near the counter where the handkerchief was and left without looking back. When the flashlight disappeared, Joseph waited a minute before moving. Then he walked to the bag. Inside were 2 bottles of water, a piece of bread, and an old blanket. Supplies for someone hiding, it was obvious. His heart raced. Scarlett could be alive, but why or from whom was she hiding? Joseph left the market with the handkerchief, his mind working quickly. He walked through a narrow street where the windows of houses were closed and asleep. Then a woman's voice called to him. "Joseph!" He turned suddenly. It was Mrs. Sophia, his childhood neighbor, wrapped in a dark shawl. Her face was tense, as if every word was dangerous. "I shouldn't say anything, but the girl passed through here." She was crying a lot. She was scared. She looked around before continuing. "Don't trust everyone, Joseph. There are people who know more than they say." "Who took her?" His voice was trembling. "All I can say is that you shouldn't give up." The old woman touched his hand for a moment and backed away. "Be careful who you open the door to." Before she could say more, the woman disappeared into the shadows of the street, leaving shivers behind. Joseph hurried through the village. He felt watched at every corner. A curtain moved quickly from one window. From another, he heard muffled whispers. The feeling was clear. He wasn't welcome there. Scarlett's disappearance was no coincidence. He was sure of that now. Behind this silence, this fear, there were deep secrets. When Joseph reached the small square, dawn had long since broken. The swing was still creaking in the wind. He approached and found something small on the ground, a pink heart-shaped plastic button. It came from one of Scarlett's dresses. Joseph closed his eyes and squeezed the piece tightly in his palm. At that moment he heard footsteps again, now closer, heavier, more solid. When he turned, the same silhouette with the scar on his chin stood a few meters away, silently watching him. The tension hung in the air until the man spoke in a deep, chilling voice. Coming back was a mistake. And without waiting for an answer, he disappeared from sight. Joseph remained motionless, his heart pounding in his temples. He couldn't retreat. He knew every clue, every threat, every shadow would take him further, and he knew that the deeper he went, the greater the price he would pay. He held the handkerchief, the button, and the note. 3 objects now weighed heavily like evidence in court. The war hadn't shown its face yet, but Joseph was already in it. What about you? If you were in Joseph's place, what would you do? Would you follow every clue, or would you retreat in the face of danger? Write in the comments. I really want to read them. The meeting night had turned gray when Joseph returned to the old market. In his hand was his daughter's blue handkerchief, already wrinkled with sweat, the note in his pocket. In his chest, the urgency of a heart that no longer distinguished fear from anger. He entered the narrow corridor, his eyes accustomed to the darkness. This time there were no hidden footsteps. There was something worse, a silence that seemed to be waiting for him. In the middle of the courtyard, a lantern illuminated an irregular circle. Underneath, the bag with bread and blanket, but now beside it was a chair, and in the chair sat Scarlet, tied with ropes. The sight split him in two. The girl was thin, her hair disheveled, her face dirty with dust, but her eyes were alive, open, a mixture of relief and fear at seeing him. "Dad." Her voice came out like a broken whisper. Joseph took a step, but a shadow emerged from the darkness, the man with the scar. "I warned you," he said, his deep voice cutting through the air. "Coming back was a mistake." Joseph planted his feet firmly on the ground. "Let my daughter go now." The man laughed lightly, a short, cold sound. "She's not just your daughter. She's the money that keeps some mouths shut." Joseph felt blood rush to his head. "If you touch her—" "I already touched, already took, already hid," he interrupted, taking a step forward. "The question is, how far will you go for her?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Joseph took a deep breath. His heart was beating in every vein, every muscle. He slowly approached, his eyes fixed on his daughter. Scarlet was crying silently, shaking her head, silently begging her father not to do anything hasty. The scarred man raised a knife. The knife reflected the lantern's light, casting a sharp gleam in the air. "Take one wrong step, soldier, and the girl bleeds." Joseph stopped. He felt the weight of the uniform he no longer wore, the training that told him about calculation, not surrendering to emotion. But the father within was screaming louder. "She's my daughter!" His whole body trembled with the need to act. "What do you want from her?" His voice came out stronger than he expected. "We want silence. We want you to leave again." She stayed, because it was the only way to make sure you wouldn't come back. The tone carried something ruthless and real. The words pierced Joseph like an invisible knife. This wasn't just kidnapping. It was punishment, a way to punish him for his absence, for his blind loyalty to the army that had taken him away from his daughter. He took a step forward. The man raised his knife. For a moment time froze. Joseph remembered little Scarlet drawing hearts on the house wall. He remembered the pink button, symbol of a torn dress that he held in the square. He remembered every night he dreamed of hearing her voice. Everything converged on that moment. Then, with a quick movement, Joseph threw the canvas bag at the lantern light. The lantern fell, shattering glass and scattering small flames on the ground. It was the second of distraction he needed. He advanced, pushing the man toward the counters. The knife fell with a metallic sound. Scarlet screamed. The fight was brutal, never normal. Fists, shoulders, short breaths. Joseph was no longer fighting like a soldier. He was fighting like a father. Every blow was a piece of accumulated anger. Every defense was a shield against the idea of losing his daughter. The man tried to resist, but Joseph immobilized him, pressing his arm against his neck. For a moment, the urge to end it all there with a single movement burned in his mind. But Scarlet's eyes stopped him, filled with fear but also with hope. Joseph released the man mercilessly, letting him collapse. He moved toward his daughter and tore the ropes with his own hands until the knots came undone. Scarlet fell into his arms, sobbing. The smell of her hair, even though mixed with dust, brought back every good memory. Joseph pressed her tightly against his chest as if holding his own heart. "I'm here. I'll never leave you again." Behind him, the man coughed, trying to get up. Joseph looked at him over his shoulder. "You can try to erase memories, but you can't erase blood." His voice was firm, almost a verdict. The shattered lantern was still burning on the ground with small flames, illuminating their faces with intermittent flashes. He looked less threatening. Joseph knelt on the ground, his daughter in his arms, feeling her body's light weight and at the same time the enormous weight of what had just happened. Scarlet was shaking, not from cold, but from exhaustion. Her face was wet with tears, and her sobs lifted and lowered her chest in irregular waves. Scarlet wrapped her arms around him as if trying to give back the childhood forcibly taken from her, to stitch every crack left by fear. "It hurts, Dad," she whispered, her eyes half closed. "I know, sweetheart. But it's over. I'm here." His voice came out almost as a whisper. For a moment the soldier within paused its existence. Only the father remained, defenseless, his trembling hands trying to warm hers. Behind him, the man with the scar on his chin groaned on the ground, but Joseph didn't look back. The threat no longer mattered. What mattered was the girl in his arms, the fragile warmth of her breath against his chest. Yet the silence around him wasn't one of relief, but of vigilance. The old market might be hiding other eyes. He had to get out of there. With difficulty he stood up, supporting Scarlett on his shoulder. Her body was very light, as if days without food had stripped her of her weight and innocence. Every step toward the market exit seemed like a ritual. The echo of his boots, the sound of loose ropes dragging on the ground, the sound of broken glass crunching under the weight. Joseph walked slowly but determinedly, protecting his daughter with his arm, as if the whole world could collapse again. Outside, dawn had long since given way to the day's first light. The sky was colored in pale gray and blue tones, as if the night had surrendered. Joseph sat her on the stone bench next to the market and knelt before her. "Can you stand?" he asked, gently touching her face. Scarlett nodded, her eyes tired but her lips trying to form a fragile smile. "I can stand now." He took a deep breath. The cold morning air filled his lungs, bringing with it the bitter taste of dust, smoke, and something harder to swallow. Guilt. Because deep down he knew it wasn't just the scar or the village's shadows that had stolen her. It was his absence, the years he chose to be there instead of in uniform. Scarlett rested her head on his chest. "I thought you'd never come back." Joseph closed his eyes. "I thought so too. But nothing, not war, nor distance, could keep me away forever." They stayed there like that for a few minutes, motionless, listening only to the silence broken by a distant rooster and his horse crying. In that moment of stillness, Joseph realized there was no victory in what had just happened. There was only survival, and survival leaves marks. He stood up, extending his hand to his daughter. Scarlett held it tightly, as if that gesture was the only safe anchor in the midst of everything. Together they walked the empty street, the timid sun beginning to reveal the facades of houses that seemed like silent witnesses. From some windows, curtains moved carefully, like eyes watching without the courage to show themselves. Joseph knew no one would speak, no one would help. The village had its own wounds and complicity. When they reached the front of the old church, they stopped. The bell was cracked, but still hung high, imposing. Joseph looked up and breathed. He wanted to touch the cold iron, but held himself back. Instead, he took his daughter's note from his pocket, already wrinkled and dirty, and straightened it in his palm. Then he put it back in his pocket, close to his heart. This was a reminder of his fear, but also of his strength in resisting. "Are we going home, Dad?" Scarlett asked in a soft voice. He looked at her and answered without hesitation. "Yes, but not to that home. There's no home there anymore. We'll start over somewhere else." Scarlett nodded, her eyes teary but determined. She held his hand and they walked again. This time they weren't steps of escape. They were steps of rebuilding. Joseph knew the road would still be long, that the marks wouldn't fade easily. But feeling her small fingers intertwined with his, he realized something new. He was no longer alone. If this chapter moved you and touched you, you can support our channel, and if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now. I await your support so we can continue to bring deeply impactful emotional stories like this one. New home. A few days later, Joseph was walking the dirt road leading to a small rental house on the edge of the village. It wasn't big. It didn't have new furniture or perfect walls, but there was silence. And not the heavy silence of abandonment, but the light silence that lets you breathe again. There, he and Scarlett found temporary refuge, and maybe for now that was enough. The girl, still fragile, spent her morning sitting at the doorstep cradling the one-eyed rag doll, while her father made improvised repairs on the roof or lit the fire for breakfast. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Every detail seemed like a new beginning. The blue handkerchief washed and hung on the clothesline, the dirty sneaker standing like a keepsake on the shelf, and the note hidden in the table drawer. 3 objects that had witnessed a struggle but had also become symbols of resistance. Joseph didn't talk much. Words came with difficulty, as if each sentence was too heavy to pass through his throat, but his gestures changed. Now he sat beside his daughter without hurrying, listened to the stories she made up, let her fill the space with her voice. The man hardened by the uniform was beginning to learn that protecting wasn't just watching or facing dangers, but staying, listening, being there. Still, there were nights when the past came back. He would wake up sweaty, hearing in his dreams the knife reflecting the lantern or the cold voice saying, "She's not just your daughter." At those times, Joseph would get up slowly, walk to his daughter's room, and just stand there silently, watching her breathe peacefully. This simple act anchored him, reminding him that despite the wounds, Scarlett was alive, there within reach. And maybe that's what changes someone forever. Realizing that not all wars are won with weapons or strategies. Some are won only with the decision to stay, with sharp determination. Final word. Now I want to talk to you. Maybe somehow you've also experienced painful traumas. Maybe you have someone you lost in life, not through death but through distance, silence, decisions made by force. Sometimes what hurts us most may not be what was done, but what we couldn't experience with our loved ones. That's what hurts and wears us down. Joseph discovered this the hard way. He returned from the army with successes, but no military victory could fill what he found his daughter in that state. What about you? Maybe there's someone waiting for your presence, your words, your reaching out. It doesn't have to be a big gesture. Sometimes listening, showing you're there, is enough. Because there are things that can't be repaired but can be cared for. And even that is a lot. You know, not every new beginning has to be big. Some are small, silent, but real. Like a father slowly brewing coffee so his daughter wakes up to the smell of home. Like a girl who smiles again despite carrying wounds no one sees. If you've stayed with us this far, it means this story has touched you somehow, and that means a lot to me. Thank you for listening to the end and staying here. I invite you to stay with us. Watch the next video too. Maybe it will also find you where you are and bring some light to your paths.